Reality is a game, but it's not about redemption or survival. It's about how much pain you can endure before you die.
John Kramer, the man you call Jigsaw, is the main antagonist of the Saw franchise, portrayed by actor Tobin Bell. The character was once a civil engineer by trade. However, his transformation began with a cascade of personal tragedies that eroded his faith in humanity's appreciation for life. After the stillbirth of his son and a terminal diagnosis of an inoperable frontal lobe cancer, Kramer attempted suicide by deliberately driving his car off of a cliff, but miraculously, he survived. John then dedicated what time he had left to kidnapping those he deemed unworthy of the lives they lived, forcing them into elaborate games involving death traps and torture devices he meticulously constructed in abandoned warehouses. These contraptions often forced his victims to mutilate themselves, sawing through limbs, peeling off skin, or making impossible moral choices to live or die. The pathology and motives of John Kramer remains fiercely debated among fans and critics to this day. Some view him as a philosophical vigilante enforcing tests of survival instinct, while others see him as a hypocritical sadist who preaches redemption while orchestrating inevitable demise. Now, with that being said, there is no real-life serial killer that resembles John Kramer 100%. His blend of intellectual sadism, the moral lectures delivered by his creepy puppet Billy, and the DIY engineering sets him apart as a cinematic creation rather than a direct mirror to reality. I personally doubt John would even consider himself to be a serial killer. However, we will be going over 3 real cases that have come eerily close to Jigsaw's work in a practical sense: elaborate setups, homemade torture devices, and a veneer of games or lessons gone fatally wrong. Unlike Kramer's master plan, where you might have to saw off your own foot to learn a lesson about infidelity, these were just the heinous acts of men and women with their own twisted agendas at work. Jigsaw would have at least given you a fighting chance. In reality, this is a game you cannot win. On August 28, 2003, on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in Erie, Pennsylvania, 46-year-old pizza delivery man Brian Douglas Wells clocked in for a shift at the Mamma Mia's Pizzeria on East Lake Road. Born and raised in Erie as one of 6 siblings in a working-class family, Wells was a familiar face around town, affable, slightly built at 5'7", 150 pounds, with a penchant for lottery tickets and scavenger hunts. He had no criminal record, just a string of dead-end jobs after dropping out of high school. At 1:32 p.m., a caller ordered 2 pizzas for delivery to a tower site at the end of a winding dirt road just off of Peach Street. An hour later, at 2:28 p.m., CCTV cameras caught a disheveled man with a cane, wearing an oversized white t-shirt that poorly concealed a bulky device beneath, walking through the doors of the PNC Bank at Summit Town Center. The man was none other than Brian Wells. Sweat beading on his forehead, he slid a handwritten note across the counter to the bank teller. The note was a overly worded dissertation that demanded the employees of the bank grant access to the vault and $250,000 cash, and if there was any resistance, the bomb strapped to Wells would explode. The bank teller stuffed about $8,700 from the drawers into a canvas bag, but told Wells access to the main vault within the 15 minutes specified in the notes wasn't possible. Wells muttered an apology before he shuffled out. It was noted that Brian Wells seemed to be very relaxed and calm during this entire situation, even grabbing a lollipop before he exited the building. He clearly wasn't acting like a man who was wearing a hinged metal collar attached to a compartment that housed two 6-inch steel pipe bombs that were rigged by 2 kitchen timers. Sirens were wailing by the time Brian Wells reached the eyeglass world just 100 yards away. Pennsylvania state troopers pulled over his car and ordered Wells to put his hands up. He complied. But as they cuffed him cross-legged on the blistering asphalt, they spotted the bomb around his neck and backed off, forming a perimeter around him. Soon, news helicopters buzzed overhead, capturing the chaos live on afternoon television. Wells rocked back and forth and spoke to the nearby troopers, who still had guns trained on him. He claimed that 4 black men had ambushed him at the delivery site and forced the collar on him at gunpoint, a story which was later debunked, but in the moment only sowed confusion. He also pleaded for help several times and asked if someone could get the keys to release him. The bomb squad was dispatched, but was held up in traffic. They would not reach the scene in time. At 3:03 p.m., the timers on the bomb chimed, and eyewitnesses described Wells' eyes widening in terror before a blast tore a fist-sized hole through his chest. He was pronounced dead at 3:19 p.m. In his car, several notes were found instructing Wells to various locations across Erie to obtain the keys which would release the bomb strapped to him. It was later determined by investigators that there was no way he would have completed the routes in time before the bomb went off. The cane that was in his possession during the bank robbery was also a disguised single-shot shotgun, which was loaded. The official story, pieced together by federal prosecutors over a 7-year FBI probe, paints Wells as not a hapless victim, but a willing, if expendable, participant in a convoluted heist hatched by a group of Erie's fractured intellectuals, which included a local handyman named Bill Rothstein, who allegedly constructed the bomb. According to court documents, Wells believed that the collar was a harmless prop to bluff police and beat any charges if he was caught. But his reaction to the beeping sounds moments before the bomb went off suggested that he might have realized the device he was wearing was very real, and unfortunately, he would not live to regret his decision. The only person we can compare to John Kramer in this case is Bill Rothstein. He was described by those who knew him as a genius with a pathological need to outsmart everyone. It is believed that Rothstein, with help from co-conspirators, constructed the bomb and placed it around Brian Wells' neck, and was able to avoid charges, primarily due to his strategic self-reporting, framing himself as a reluctant witness rather than a participant. And his untimely death made it impossible to charge him with anything. Some speculate that he played his role in the bank heist, knowing that he would likely not face any consequences because of his declining health, specifically cancer. Sound familiar? As mentioned earlier, the FBI believes that Brian Wells was involved in the plot, and the statements made by the co-conspirators also support this. However, years later, a sex worker named Jessica Hoopsick, who was acquainted with the parties involved and was allegedly aware of the plan to rob the bank, confessed that she set up Brian Wells, who was one of her clients, in exchange for drug money, and insists that he was innocent from the very beginning. This confession has been met with skepticism. Further complicating matters is the bizarre story that Brian Wells himself told the police about the black men who forced the bomb around him, which was obviously a lie. And let's not forget about the loaded shotgun he was holding either. The true nature of Brian Wells' involvement, or if he knew he was wearing an active bomb around his neck, remains unclear. The aftermath of this case spiraled into a labyrinth of trials, appeals, and conspiracies. Believe me when I tell you that the collar bomb incident was only the tip of the iceberg. And it's honestly too convoluted for me to get into in this video, but I will recommend a 2018 Netflix docuseries called Evil Genius, the true story of America's most diabolical bank heist, which unravels the entire story. On March 8, 2009, on a drizzling Sunday evening in North London, 45-year-old Jeffrey Howe trudged home to his modest two-bedroom flat, exhausted from another grueling day at work. Howe was a jovial native with a heart of gold, was a die-hard Manchester United supporter, rarely missing a match on TV, and was known among his colleagues for his easygoing personality and willingness to lend a hand. Divorced with grown kids, he forged a bond with a former coworker named Stephen Marshall, letting the 38-year-old crash rent-free since November of 2008. Marshall was a 6'2", 220-pound bodybuilder who worked part-time as a nightclub bouncer. He called himself the Chef because of his fascination with knives. Stephen Marshall repeatedly claimed a connection with the notorious Addams crime family during the 1990s. Marshall's girlfriend, Sarah Bush, was a 21-year-old escort who he had met on the job and was also staying at Howe's place. Around 2 a.m., Howe was dozing off in his pajamas when a kitchen knife plunged twice between his shoulder blades, one nicking his lung, and the other severing arteries in a precise, butcher-like strike. He awoke screaming, thrashing in agony. Bush, woken by the commotion, rushed in and jammed a pillow over his face, muffling gurgles into silence as blood soaked the sheets. Stephen Marshall was far from finished. Over the next 12 hours, he dismembered Howe's body, making precise cuts using a sharp, fine-bladed knife. The severed pieces went into 8 bin liners, some wrapped in cling film and plastic sheeting and sealed with silver duct tape. The couple played house in Jeffrey Howe's flat, forging his signature to claim housing benefits and selling his belongings on eBay, using the money to buy drugs. The remains of Jeffrey Howe were scattered in various locations in Hertfordshire and Leicestershire, forming a grisly jigsaw puzzle for investigators. After friends and family members of Jeffrey Howe filed a missing persons report, police in North London paid a visit to Howe's Southgate flat. When questioned, both Marshall and his girlfriend Sarah Bush initially claimed that Howe was still alive and had simply left town. However, forensic evidence was found inside the flat, which included large bloodstains in the bedroom, bathroom, and under the carpets. Once dental records and fingerprints confirmed the dismembered corpse as Jeffrey Howe, Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush were charged with murder. The trial began on January 12, 2010, at St. Albans Crown Court. Witness testimony backed Marshall's claimed connection with the Addams crime family and how he was experienced in the disposal of human bodies. He was sentenced to life in prison with a 36-year minimum, parole ineligible until 2045. He still sits in a high-security UK prison to this day. Sarah Bush was acquitted of murder, but convicted of preventing justice by giving false statements. She drew 3 years and 9 months and was out by 2013. The official story is simple. Marshall and Bush saw easy money and an easy mark. They killed Jeffrey Howe, drained his finances, and scattered the evidence. What began as a charity ended in multiple bin liners. Howe's family still wonders why he trusted a jobless bouncer with a knife obsession. When the remains of Jeffrey Howe were still being pieced together by detectives, Stephen Marshall's chilling new moniker emerged from the heart of the investigation and the ensuing media storm: the Jigsaw Killer. On the afternoon of March 19, 1999, in Albuquerque, New Mexico's sun-baked underbelly, 22-year-old Cynthia Lee Vigil leaned against a rusted payphone outside of a parking lot on Central Avenue, tallying up the crumpled bills from the night's tricks. Growing up in Albuquerque with primarily her grandmother, Cynthia had spiraled into a cycle of meth addiction and petty theft. Her rap sheet was a blur of solicitation busts and a drug trafficking charge from that same year, a profile that made her, tragically, prime prey for predators patrolling the lots. As a white van drove up with its windows down, the driver flashed a friendly grin. "Need a ride? I got cash and crank inside," said a 59-year-old maintenance worker. Cynthia woke up sometime later, naked and chained by a dog collar to a wall-mounted pulley, in a soundproofed trailer parked on the dusty fringes of Elephant Butte Lake, plywood walls lined with whips, restraints, and surgical instruments, a modified gynecologist's chair bolted beneath halogen lights, electroshock pedals wired to a car battery, and a ceiling mirror forcing victims to watch their degradation. This prison was a $100,000 custom rig known as the Toy Box, an Airbnb for Cenobites as it were. For over 17 years, David Parker Ray and his enablers, daughter Glenda Jean Ray and his girlfriend Cindy Hendy, lured at least 40 women, truck stop hookers, runaways, and drifters with promises of drugs or cash. The victims would wake up strapped, dosed with sodium pentothal, then subjected to days of electroshock, sexual assault, and live torture filmed on VHS for Ray's private collection. Cynthia's escape came when Ray left for work on March 25th. Hendy, distracted by a phone call, left the padlock keys on a table within her reach. After hearing some commotion, she hung up and rushed back inside and saw that Cynthia had unlocked her restraints. Hendy smashed a lamp over her head in order to subdue her, but this didn't work. The two women grappled on the floor, tipping over a box of Ray's assortment of tools where an ice pick tumbled out among the debris. Seizing the opportunity, Cynthia snatched it up and stabbed Hendy in the head, then bolted. She pounded on the door of a nearby mobile home where an elderly couple lived, and the police were called. Deputies soon arrived on scene, the open door of the toy box revealing the wall of whips and chains, along with the Polaroids of bound, screaming faces. David Parker Ray was arrested that night. The ensuing FBI raid uncovered jewelry and clothes from unidentified victims. The nearby Elephant Butte Lake area yielded primarily animal bones in the initial searches. However, human leg bones were discovered on the shoreline during a search in 2011, but by then, it was too late. Ray faced charges for 12 abductions but no murders. Prosecutors couldn't match the remains to names, despite his taped confessions. He pleaded guilty in 2001 to kidnapping and rape against Cynthia Vigil and two others, Kelly Garrett in 1996 and Angelica Montano in 1997, drawing 223 years. On May 28, 2002, Ray died of a heart attack at the Lee County Correctional Facility just before a scheduled police interrogation. He took many secrets to his grave. Cynthia Hendy, who survived the ice pick attack, flipped on Ray for leniency and was paroled on July 15, 2019. She relocated quietly to Hamilton, Montana, and had to register as a low-risk sex offender. I bet the locals loved that. Glenda Jean pleaded no contest to kidnapping in 2001, serving 2.5 years, plus 5 probation, and was released in 2004, fading into obscurity. The official story is that Ray was a lone sadist with accomplices, but not a convicted killer. The death of David Parker Ray severed any chance of discovering the full truth of what took place inside the walls of the toy box for all those years. The trailer was bulldozed in 2012. Despite no murder convictions, David Parker Ray is known as the Toy Box Killer. The overwhelming evidence of serial torture and Ray's taped confessions have etched this name in infamy. Many believe that the bodies are either still at the bottom of Lake Butte or buried somewhere in the vast New Mexico desert. Officially, the case is closed. Unofficially, some say that not everyone involved in these crimes was captured. suggesting that Ray was a part of a hidden network.
There's always a reason to be afraid.